Hello there, I'm Jimmy Vegas, and this is how to make an RPG in Unity 5, and welcome to episode 1. So, I'm going to get straight into this because I know a lot of people have already seen quite a few of my tutorials, they're already well up on what's going on. So, I'm going to get straight into this as quick and as fast as I possibly can. But there are a few things that we need to discuss first of all. So I'm assuming at this point you've already got Unity installed, whether you've got Unity 5.5, which I'll be using in this series, or whether you've got an earlier version, later version, whichever. You've probably been presented with this box because this is the one you see when you install Unity. So just for reference, everything I have ticked here is just about what you would want installed. It is entirely up to you whether you want Microsoft Visual Studio installed or not. That is what we'll be using for doing our C# scripting in this series. I will be using MonoDevelop, but you guys can use Visual Studio if you want. The same principle applies to everything. So yeah, just make sure they're ticked if you want to build for iOS, Android, Mac, PC, whichever. And make sure you click Next and follow the instructions to get installed. Once you're installed, you start up Unity, you should be presented with a screen very much like this one. Very simple. For this series, all we need to do is put in whatever we want here. So for example, RPG Unity, whatever you want, and then select your location wherever you want to save your project. We'll be doing this in 3D, so make sure that's ticked, and we won't need to add any of these asset packages just yet. So once you've set your project to go, you should be presented with a screen just like this one. So let's go into a little bit about this series and let's discuss where we'll be going with this one. So essentially, we'll be creating a fully fledged RPG game which you'll be able to publish for almost any platform, whether it be PC, Android, iOS, Mac, even PlayStation and Xbox, providing you have the license. But we'll talk about those ones later on in the series. We'll be using loads of different elements from various role-playing games, which are coming up, which have already passed, which are out now, like from Elder Scrolls to Zelda to Final Fantasy. So if you guys want to see any sort of feature which you see in any RPG game, just let me know in the comments and I'll see if I can incorporate it into a tutorial. But we'll be creating a few of our own original ideas too, but you'll see that when we get to it. So as for all the programming as well, as I've already mentioned, we'll be doing this entirely in C#, but don't be surprised if we do the odd script in JavaScript, just to kind of prove a point of how Unity can handle two different types of script. But as I say, our main programming language will be C#. So overall, this series is aimed at absolute beginners to Unity. So if you've just downloaded it, you have no idea what to do, but you feel like making an RPG game, this series is going to be perfect for you. If you've maybe followed a couple of other series I've done or somewhere else on YouTube, you'll have learned bits here and there, but you're not exactly sure how to piece them together. Well, you'll learn loads of new stuff doing this, so this is probably great for you. And if you already know quite a bit about Unity and just want to brush up on your skills maybe, then just follow along, see what you like, and see how it goes. So let's get everything started. Firstly, over here, we have something called the hierarchy. Now, this does look slightly different from earlier versions of Unity 5. I believe version 5.4 and below didn't have the hierarchy like this. That version didn't have this up here, and you just had everything in the hierarchy. So the hierarchy itself is where you contain every game object in this scene view. So if we select the camera, you can see it selects the camera. Directional light, it selects the directional light in this scene view. Now this scene view is where everything can be seen within your game or your level or your area or whatever you want to call it. So if we insert objects into our game, if we import, let's say, a rock, it appears here in this scene view. Next tab along, we have the game view. Now this game view is essentially where you can play the game once you've built it. Even just testing, theoretically we can play this scene we've got right now just by pressing this play button up here. And there we are. It's not great, but we can play that because we actually have the main camera. The main camera is something which is important in Unity. That is obviously what displays the game itself. So over here we have the inspector panel. Now the inspector panel is where all the number crunching happens. For example, if we click on our directional light, we can change its position, its rotation, and its scale. Also change the color, its type, and many other things over here. We'll be dealing a lot with the inspector panel because a lot of the features can be altered quite nicely in here. For example, if we press play and head over to the inspector pane or panel, whatever you want to call it, you can change the intensity over here. It shouldn't have too much of an impact at the moment because there's nothing in our scene, but everything can be changed real time in the game. But when you stop the game, everything goes back to its default. So if you want something to change and stick when you play the game, you make sure you change it when you're in the scene view and not playing the game. So down here we have the project window. Now the project window is where we store all our assets and our scripts, materials, textures, all kind of things like that, all our prefabs. So if we'd like to keep it nice and tidy at least, so we like to keep it sorted, i.e. in the assets folder we can right click create new folder and it will keep it nice and tidy, i.e. parent and child objects, which we'll discuss in the hierarchy probably next tutorial. So yeah, down here, that's where we keep all of our bits and bobs that we can put into our game. Here is the console. Now, we won't go into the console too much just yet because this is mainly for when we start using our programming. What this does is displays any errors or problems we may have in a script or in the game itself as it's running. But as I say, we'll get into that at a different time. So let's start building a game, shall we? So if we go up here to game object, you'll see there are loads of different options. All these are grayed out at the moment, so we don't need to worry about them. So we can create any of these game objects: a 3D object, 2D, light, audio, UI, which is user interface, particle system, and a camera. So let's start with something fairly simple. Let's start with a cube. So now you'll see the cube has appeared here in your hierarchy. It's also given an orange outline here because it's been selected. Now, earlier versions of Unity 5 did not have this feature of being the selected object highlighted so much. It just gives a bit more visualization of what is currently selected. So let's have a look at some basic settings of this cube to see how we can alter it in the game. So we can change the position to 0, 0, and 0. Now position 0, 0, 0 will always be dead center of your screen on all three axes: the x-axis, which is across, the y-axis, which is up and down, and the z or z-axis, which is across the other way, opposite to the x. Just a quick note there, I will say z-axis in this because I am British. I know guys in America, you guys use Z, and some use Z, and some Canadians, you guys use Z. Australians, Z, Z, not quite sure. Let me know in the comments. Rotation. So once again, using the X, Y, and Z, you can change the rotation like that. You can either input a number, let's say 50, or you can hover over the X and you can move your mouse sideways to change the rotation. Same applies with the Y. You can change it by hovering your mouse over, holding the mouse button down, and changing like that. And same with the Z, like so. So I'm going to show you a couple of little tips now. So you can use the mouse wheel to zoom out, and you can double click an item in the hierarchy to focus in on it. So if we zoom out, double click, we can focus in. Same applies for pressing the F key. So if we zoom out, press F, it zooms in and focuses. That's quite handy. So up here we have a couple of buttons which you can click. You'll notice I've been on this one the whole time. This one is the one that allows you to select items in the scene. This hand allows you to move around the scene like so. So you can move around and zoom out, zoom in. Using the right mouse button, if you hold it down, you'll notice the cursor turns to an eye and you can pan around and look around on a pivot. So you can see like so. So you can look that way and zoom out that way and look down and press F to focus on the cube. So let's zoom out a touch using our mouse wheel. Let's change our camera angle around a bit and let's increase the scale of our object to 3 by 3 by 3. And once again, you can change using the mouse hovering over. Okay, so they're the very basic settings of having an object in our game. So now let's change this cube into perhaps a floor. So let's get it all back straight again. So 0, 0, 0, and let's change the scale so as it kind of represents a bit more of a floor. So we want it quite long, so we'll have 20. We don't want it too thick, so let's change this back to 1. And we want it quite long again, so let's have this as 30. So if we zoom out, you can see that doesn't look too bad. Okay, so for another shortcut that you can use, you can hold Control and press P, and it will play the game rather than having to go to the play button up here. So you can see there we have a nice floor. It's white, doesn't look too good for now, but as I say, this goes on and on and on, and it will look better by the end. So you can press Control and P again to stop play. And we're back in our scene view. So now what I'm going to show you is something called snap settings. So if you go to Edit, Project Settings, sorry, not Project Settings, Snap Settings down here, and you can change these three options here, X, Y, and Z. By default, they may be set to 1 or 0.5. For me, I think they were set to 1. I've changed them to 0.5. But let's change this to 2 by 2 by 2. Press the red X. And if we go to this little option up here, the cross, and you'll see our colored arrows appear. So X is red, Y is green, Z is blue. If you now hold Control and pull on one of these arrows, you'll see that it snaps quite sharply, like so. That is opposed to if you didn't hold Control, you could gently move it along. So to undo, it's the same as Windows, Control and Z. So let's put it back to the center, which is 0, 0, 0. The same applies to going up and the other way. Hold Control and you can lift in the snap settings. There we go. So let's try something else. Let's try duplicating this object. But first, let's rename it. So if we go to over here, right click and rename, and let's change it to floor 001. So if we hold Control and press the D key now, it will make an exact duplicate of that object that we have selected in the hierarchy. So hold Control, press D, and you'll notice it redefines it by putting a 1 in brackets at the side of it. Now, I do believe in very early versions of Unity 5, it didn't do that. It just kind of increased whatever number it was here. So that if you've got an early version of Unity 5, it may change it to floor 002. Doesn't matter too much. So if we hold Control and then drag on the X-axis, we can see it pulls it apart there. So we can then snap it flush against the other object that we have there. And you can see that there will be absolutely no gap in between there because they are snapped flush together. So let's select both objects and let's move them together. So that looks fine. Okay, next thing we'll do is let's add in another object. So let's click off both of them by clicking anywhere in the hierarchy or the scene view. And let's bring in a sphere. So let's go to Game Object, 3D Object, and Sphere. Let's bring this sphere into the center by changing our X, Y, and Z. And let's bring it upwards to about there. Now at this point, hopefully you should see a shadow over here. We'll go into shadows next tutorial. I think we'll do a little bit of lighting in next tutorial. I'll explain that a little bit more. Let's increase the scale of our sphere to 2 by 2 by 2, just to make it a little bit bigger. And as you can see, it's still surrounded by the orange. We can tell we have it selected. So you'll notice over here in the inspector pane that things do appear differently depending on whatever object is selected. For example, if we click our directional camera, you'll notice it only has a light as a component, but if we have our sphere, it has 3 different components: the mesh, collider, and renderer. I won't go into too much detail about these at the moment, but each of these are called components. And adding a component into an object changes its, well, it can change it altogether. I'll prove that by going Add Component, Physics, and clicking on Rigid Body. Now, a rigid body is a way of controlling an object a little bit better than anything else in the game. For example, you can use gravity with it. So if we were to press play on this game now, we'd be able to see this sphere fall to our floor. And there we go. So it's fallen to our floor. We can speed it up by increasing its mass. So increase the mass, and we should see it fall a little bit faster. Don't have to worry too much about it, to be honest. We can also change that by unticking gravity. If we don't want it to fall, we just want it to hover, we can just untick gravity. But we don't need to worry too much about it at the moment. So the next thing we're going to need to do is we've come this far, we've got something going on. Let's right click and rename our sphere as, let's say, ball. And now we're going to want to save our scene. So let's go to File and Save Scene. And let's call this Area 01. So now you'll notice in our project window, we now have this icon appear here, which is our scene. So if we were to go to a different scene, we could still double click this one and it will load up what we've saved right here. So we've gone into a little bit of detail here, but we haven't explained quite how you would develop for different platforms. So if we go to File and Build Settings, and at this point, you need to figure out what device you're going to build your game for. Now, I will point out that later on in the series, the longer you leave it without changing whichever platform you want to, changing or switching a platform may take longer and longer. This is due to the size of your project. The bigger your project, the longer it will take. So if you want to develop for iOS, click on iOS and then click on Switch Platform. If you want to develop for PC, I think by default that's okay. It's not worth changing any other settings here because these aren't too important. And as I explained before, you can develop for Xbox One, but you will need to download the module. By default, it is not included in the package for installing Unity. Same applies with PS4 and the Vita, but you do need a license as it says there. So you need to get in touch with Unity themselves. So for now, we will be developing for PC, but I will touch on Xbox, PlayStation, iOS and Android throughout the series, just to give you a little bit of heads up on different things. So this is the intro to making an RPG. So next episode, what we're going to look at is we're going to look at some textures. We're going to look at importing into our project window down here. We'll look at some lighting, and we'll also look at putting in a playable character so we can actually start moving around in our game as soon as possible. So one thing to finish on, I think, what you need to do is in-game object and 3D object, explore the different objects that you can pull in up until plane. You don't need to worry about these ones just yet because we'll go into each one of these as we go further in the series. There are different shaped objects you can import, a cylinder, sphere, cube, and you can always modify them. So an example of that is if we change the scale of our sphere to, let's say, 10, it completely changes shape. So just explore with them, the size, transformation, everything, and just see where you get to. So until episode number 2, guys, thank you for watching.